Welcome to APEC. It's September 11th, and I'm your moderator, Tim Ventura. First, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us on this call, along with everyone watching us on YouTube. During this special conference event, Dr. Jack Sarfatti will discuss a new approach to warp drive design, utilizing gravitational metamaterials to create a low-power warp drive based on the conventional and well-accepted principles of relativity theory. He'll also describe how this new model for warp drive propulsion explains the reported flight performance of UAPs as described in the US Navy Nimitz encounters. So a couple of quick reminders. You can view conference replays, details, and speaker info on our website at www.altpropulsion.com. And right now, I'd like to take a moment to remember all of the brave heroes at the World Trade Center in the Pentagon on the anniversary of an event that happened 20 years ago today, on September 11th, 2001. Now, let me introduce you to our guest. Dr. Jack Sarfatti has a PhD from the University of California. He taught physics at San Diego State University, worked with David Bohm at Birkbeck College, and with Abdus Salam at the International Center for Theoretical Physics in Trieste, Italy. He's been working on the post-quantum physics of consciousness and the paranormal since he directed the famous Assailant seminars in 1976, described by Gary Zukov in The Dancing Wu-Li Masters. Jack was the basis of the memorable time-traveling Dr. Emmett Brown in the Back to the Future trilogy. He was featured in the Star Trek IV DVD Special Collector's Edition, speaking on time travel, the art of the possible. And he's done many radio, television, and print media appearances over the course of his career. He's also the author of Super Cosmos, Space, Time, and Beyond, Destiny Matrix, and the co-author with Fred Allen Wolf and Bob Tobin of Space, Time, and Beyond, Toward an Explanation of the Unexplainable. So let's welcome Jack to today's event. And now I'll hand things over to him to get started.
Okay. Well, just a brief statement about, in memory of the brave men of the New York Fire Department and the Police Department who sacrificed their lives to try to save as many people as they could 20 years ago. And a lot of people refer to the events of 20 years ago as a great intelligence failure. And one of the main themes of today's talk is that there's a second intelligence failure happening right now in 2021. I'm not talking about Afghanistan. Of course, that was also an intelligence failure, but I'm talking about the whole UFO, UAP brouhaha with the Pentagon, the recent Pentagon Task Force report, which was a big nothing burger, and all the publicity that Louis Elizondo is getting from TTSA. Well, actually, they left TTSA, and my main message today is that whenever you hear people like Louis Elizondo or even Michio Kaku, who's a good physicist, who I know him, saying that we don't understand the phenomenon, or even Nick Herbert, who's here, I'm sure we'll have a little encounter with Nick, that we don't understand the phenomenon, that it's a technology that's 100 years, 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years ahead of us. I don't think that's true at all. And that'll be a major point that I want to emphasize here and now. So let's go on to the next slide, okay? Okay, this is the problem. This is the problem. And I'm referring to point number one, the sudden and instantaneous acceleration that is reported by the Navy and other sources. The apparent hypersonic velocities without signatures, that is, there's no disturbance of the atmosphere, like you would see a jet engine, a jet exhaust, sonic boom, stuff like that. Low observability, a kind of stealthy thing. Now, this for transmedium travel, I don't have much to say about that. That's Hal Puthoff. Hal Puthoff, who seems to have, did have access to classified data along with Eric Davis. They're more plugged into the intelligence establishment. They claim that And I can sort of see that, yeah, maybe possible with metric engineering, but I don't really know too much about 4. But the positive lift, yes, definitely positive lift. That's the anti-gravity feature. I can explain that and make predictions with that. So let's say points number 1, 2, 3, and 5 is what I'm talking about. Number 4, I'll leave that for Hal Puthoff to explain more what he means by that. And I know there have been claims about that. So let's go on to the, and one other thing before we change slides. I must say, I probably have the longest institutional memory of anybody alive today in 2021 about UFOs. Why is that? Because already when I was about 10 years old, I met an army officer. Well, my grandfather was working for the Army down at the Quartermaster Corps in the New York City Garment District. And I was living with my grandparents at the time. And after school and on school holidays, I would go to work with my grandfather and down at the Army Quartermaster Corps, where they had all these like laboratories. And this happened over the course of a year or two. Maybe I was like 10 or 11. So this would have been like 1949, 1950. And I used to hang out with these Army officers, and I was, reading science fiction books, Astounding Analog, all those science fiction things, and into rockets and all that stuff. And one officer in particular, I think, was Phil Corso, who wrote the day after Roswell, because I can't be certain, but when I saw Corso's photograph, when Bill Burns' book came out several years ago, it like rang a bell as an instant recognition. So and in any case, what I'm saying is I was part of a project already starting as a child, around 10 years of age and on. Then later in high school, I was part of a group of super kids that was being funded by, what's his name? This guy, one of the founders of Texas Instruments was out of Columbia University, and it involved, they were trying to, well, it would involve people from the government, from Sandia Corporation. After school, we had all these intense seminars in Manhattan. It was led by this guy, Walter Breen, who was kind of a controversial character. It was because it was several years that we were tested for psychic abilities. It was like this, it's like that movie. And we were given advanced information on physics, stuff like that. And periodically, these guys would come from, I think it was Sandia Corporation, or in any case, Albuquerque. They looked like FBI agents, the black suits. They would lecture us on patriotism. Remember, this is 1950s, early 1950s. This is the McCarthy era. And there was a lot of stuff on anti-communism. I know people from Ayn Rand was involved in this. And one of the kids in the project actually was Milton Friedman, who, from the Federal Reserve. He was older than me. And another kid was Johnny Glowgower, who was a quiz kid, won a Westinghouse scholarship. And any case, it was because of this program, after school program, that I received full scholarship to MIT, University of Chicago, and Cornell. And I chose to go to Cornell. And so the point is, we were talking about flying saucers and the paranormal back then. So I'd say, so it's like 70 years in which I've been involved in these fringe issues. And, this is a little bit what Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis call high strangeness, and all these synchronicities. All right, let's go on. We can come back to this paranormal, high strangeness aspect of my world line, my life, because it's very relevant to what's going on. So let's go to the next slide. All right, this is at this point. All right, let's just go through the slides. Then we can open up to questions. I know Nick is here; he can ask intelligent questions. I don't know the other people. So this is just a brief review of general relativity, and I won't say, let's go on to the next slide because you'll be able to see this on your own. And hopefully some of you have already seen this slideshow. Let's go on to the next slide. This is more about how general relativity works. And let's go on to the next slide. Again, about the real gravity fields are described by the curvature tensor of space-time. Oh, okay. Now here we have Einstein's field equation. That's important. Einstein's field equation in the GAB is RAB minus 1F GABR. Okay, what's important is that term 8 pi times Newton's constant capital G divided by C to the 4th, where C is normally considered to be the speed of light in vacuum, okay? And now these equations are what are called tensor equations. If there be I'm going to come back to this technical point because I'm going to need my iPad to be able to draw what I'm talking about. So all I'm pointing at this point is just look at that coefficient on the right-hand side of the equation, 8 pi G over C to the 4. That's the key object, mathematical object that I'll be talking about that I claim, along with Professor Keith Wanser, who's on the faculty at Physics Department, Cal State Fullerton. I claim we can control that factor. By making it big, we can produce a strong gravitational field on the left-hand side using a small amount of energy, which is that TAB, or energy density, stress energy density, actually. And that's how the Tic Tacs work. That's how all the UFOs work. They're low-power warp drive vehicles. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, well, let's just, this is some numerical work showing why anti-gravity is so hard. Anti-gravity is so hard because it's very difficult to bend space-time. In fact, if you read the standard books about it, even like Jim Woodward's book, Making Starships or something like that, he says it takes like a Jupiter amount. You'd have to take the entire mass of the planet Jupiter and convert it into energy in order to get anything useful. And of course, that's impossible. And that's not what the Navy is seeing in these Tic Tacs. The Navy is seeing these things, buzzing them in restricted battle spaces, and they're hardly using any energy. So there's something that they're missing. There's something that the pundits are missing. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, well, this is from, I just want to give a little credit to this guy, David Chester, who prepared these slides actually, and he's a PhD in physics, theoretical physics, University of California, was an undergraduate at MIT. Let's go on to the next slide. Again, okay, this is more on the alternate views of the matter-gravity coupling, and I encourage anybody who's seriously interested in the subject on their own time to go through this slideshow. The slideshow's available. It'll be, you can look at it at your leisure. And also you feel free to send me email messages if you have questions later on by email. You know, this is difficult, complicated stuff. And we're doing the best we can. Okay, the space-time stiffness of vacuum, using the speed of light in vacuum, you see it's 10 to the 43 newtons. That's a lot. That's too big. That's how stiff space-time is, using units of force, using the MKS system units of force. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. All right, let's skip. Okay, well, no, this is important. Okay. The key thing about general relativity is what are called geodesics. What's the simplest geodesic? In Euclidean geometry and in Newtonian non-relativistic physics, the geodesic of space-time is simply a particle moving in a straight line in flat space-time at constant speed without any acceleration. That's the geodesic for flat space-time, and it accords with our common sense notions. Now this gets generalized. This gets generalized in the curved space-time of general relativity, which is what happens. The geodesics are paths of what are called test particles. What is a test particle? A test particle is a mass where we could ignore that it's generating its own gravitational field. In other words, the mass is so small compared to, let's say, the mass of the Earth, that it's only the mass of the Earth that whose gravitational field we have to consider. And what happens is any test particle that's neutral, there's no electromagnetic fields, there's no net electromagnetic charge or multipole moments, anything like that. So what will happen is that the test particle will move on what's called a time-like geodesic. And I'll get back to all this when I have my Apple iPad with my Apple Pencil. I can draw all this. Pardon the noise, that's a truck. And so the point is this, what about these geodesics? Well, when you're on a geodesic, you're weightless. Okay, a good example of a geodesic is the International Space Station orbiting the Earth, in free motion orbiting the Earth. They'll say circular elliptical orbits. And all the astronauts are weightless in there. They're floating around, or they have to tie themselves down or use magnetic boots. It's not like Space Odyssey, where we have a rotating thing to make artificial gravity. But so the point is this: that if you're free floating, John Archibald Wheel likes to call it free floating on a geodesic rather than free falling. But when you're just drifting along on a geodesic, you're weightless. There's no G-force on you, okay? But if you look at that space station, and it has centripetal acceleration relative to us. So it appears to be accelerating, but in fact, it's not really accelerating to the guys on board. So there are two ideas of acceleration that most people do not understand very well, including a lot of engineers who should know better, and even some physicists who should know better. In general relativity, we have what is called proper acceleration. That is the local G-force that a person feels. And in order to have G-force, you have to have a non-gravitational force. Generally, it'll just be the electromagnetic force has to act on some charges in the material, and it has to push the system off the natural time-like geodesic. Now, this is happening to us on Earth all the time. That's why we feel weight. The reason we feel weight, that we feel heavy, is because we are properly accelerating radially outward all the time. We're being pushed by the electromagnetic forces of the Earth, of the star that we're sitting on. We're accelerating outward. But we're accelerating outward without moving, obviously. We're stationary because space-time is curved. See, this is you see, if space-time is flat and you accelerate, you've got to move from one place to another. But when the space-time is curved due to gravitational field, you have to accelerate in order not to move at all. So this is a big thing that most people don't understand, okay? And this confuses everybody. It confuses a lot of people, especially it confuses the military. It confuses Louis Elizondo. It confuses Christopher Mellon. It confuses Senator Marco Rubio. It confuses, maybe it may even confuse Bob Bigelow. I don't know. But it confuses a lot of people, and it's understandable. But now, let's go on to the next slide. Okay, well, this is, we'll come back to this later. Understanding Einstein's gravity field equation in general relativity, in a way, is no more difficult, if you look in the right way, no more difficult than understanding Ohm's law for simple electrical circuits. You know, a voltage, you apply a voltage to wires, you get a current to flow, and there's a resistor, and there's maybe a capacitor and an inductor, and you get an all that stuff. So as electrical circuit theory, you can understand by analogy. You can understand by analogy what Einstein's field equation is. It's in terms of electrical circuit theory. There's an analogy there. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, the Alcubierre warp drive. All right. Now you've seen this a lot, and this is a toy model. It's not realistic, really. There are things, wrong with it, but it just illustrates the idea. Now, if you look at the, see the reddish, the pink little lip underneath that plane there. Okay, that's called a gravity redshift, because space when you have attractive gravity field, the three-dimensional space actually kind of contracts, and it causes a redshift. It's like spectral lines from radiations from atoms. They'll be shifted toward the red. Okay. Now in the back, so the nose. Imagine this to be like a flying saucer of some kind. So the red part is the nose of the craft. Say it's coming toward you. If you see a flying saucer that's coming toward you, there's going to be a gravity redshift. There's going to be a gravity redshift, which is going to be opposing the motional Doppler blue shift. Normally, if an object is moving fast toward you, any kind of waves coming from that object tend to get shifted to higher frequency. It's called blue shift. But because of this gravitational effect, in addition to the motional effect, it's going to weaken the blue shift. So in warp drive, the gravitational redshift in front of the object, at the nose of the object, is going to weaken or counteract the motional blue shift. And likewise, in the rear, in the tail of the craft, where you normally would see a redshift, because moving away from you, you're going to see a blue shift. So anti-gravity, that's where space is expanding, see? And what's happening, the ship is just like surfing along, just freely floating on a geodesic. This is geodesic motion, zero G-force inside. The ship is controlling its own local time-like geodesic, and it's not feeling any G-force. I mean, it can, if you design it badly, you could have some G-force in there, but I'm talking about the optimal, the ideal situation. So, but it's controlling its own geodesic. It's canceling out, say, the external gravitational field. It's overpowering the external gravitational field, and it's controlling, and it can change its motion. So when you see the UFO or the Tic Tac, it appears to be going at 20,000 miles an hour, and then suddenly makes a big right angle turn. And they say people like Kevin Knuth, who knows the special relativity, but it doesn't seem to understand general relativity that well. He says, well, yeah, impossible G-forces. Yeah, they are impossible G-forces if the thing is moving through space. If it's not warp drive, what you're seeing is impossible. But with warp drive, you're seeing exactly what you expect to see. So if you properly understand warp drive, there's no mystery on these motions, the high-speed motions with sudden changes, or the apparent the thing kind of disappears and it reappears somewhere else almost instantly. That's all easy to understand. It's exactly what you have in warp drive if you can control the gravitational field with small amounts of energy, which these things are obviously doing. That's an empirical fact. See, Nick, I hope you're listening to this. Saying, I'm trying to explain facts. I'm not doing this out of like I'm jerking off because of some string theory, 11-dimensional, mathematical. I've smoked too much dope on mathematics. I mean, they're saying, what was it, Karl Marx, or was it Lenin? Somebody said the opium, a religion is the opiate of the masses. Well, in this case, too much pure mathematics is the opiate of the theoretical physicists. There's too much around. And let me say this again. Let me give a little history. About 50 years ago, and this is about the same time I met Nick Herbert, actually. About 50 years ago, all kinds of weird things happened. And it was the CI, Central Intelligence Agency, and contractors and agents from the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Department, in particular a guy named George Koopman, who Nick knows very well. This is like when was this? Let's see, this was 1970, I guess the end of 1975, right before the Esalen seminars that that I had. Gary Zukov came down. He wrote the Dancing Woolly Masters. Right before those seminars began, Saul Paul Sirag and I and Fred Allen Wolf, we were living in a apartment right across the street from the Grace Cathedral. The apartment was paid for by a woman named Jean Lanier, who was a close friend of Lawrence Rockefeller. It was actually Rockefeller money. paying for this several flats. In fact, Brian Josephson, Nobel Prize physicist Brian Joseph, stayed with us. He had just gotten married, I think, to his wife Carol, and he spent about a week with us, going down to see Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ and Brendan O'Regan and Edgar Mitchell, all these guys, testing Uri Geller and people like that. In any case, so I'm up there with, I think Saul Paul Sirag was there, and also Fred Allen Wolf, I think, was there. And we're in the main room, right, looking at the window. There's the Grace Cathedral right across the street from us on top of Nob Hill. And George takes out a bunch takes out a briefcase, and he opens them and said, "These are burglar tools." There's a CIA agent. You have to learn how to break into, how to open doors. And George used to play, he used to try to train us. He said, well, look, if you're going to be a CIA agent, you have to have situational awareness. You go through all this stuff, because we were very bad at it, like trying to, what color of clothing is that woman wearing? And, there's these training things, I guess, that they do at wherever their base is, Guantanamo, wherever the hell it is. Quantico, I guess that's the FBI. In any case, he liked to play games. I was, intelligence agent games with us. And, we were pretty young. But in any case, so we're up there this one time, and George gets very serious, and he says, there are two things the CIA wants you guys to figure out. Consciousness. This is the whole now, How the Hippies Save Physics. David Kaiser's book talks about how does consciousness work? Why do they want about consciousness? What about consciousness? Because they want to control minds, right? I mean, this is MK Ultra. I could tell you a lot about MK Ultra too. And so how does consciousness work? And now when they say consciousness, I'm not talking Deepak Chopra, enlightenment, Zen Buddhism. I'm not talking Nick Herbert's, he plays his flute, all that stuff goes into enlightenment. All that stuff is good. I have nothing against that stuff, but that's not what George Cooper was talking. He wanted to know the physics of consciousness. He wanted to know what is there in matter that enables us to be conscious. That's the physics consciousness problem, the sort of thing that Hameroff is trying to work on with Penrose, right? That they want to know how to make machines that are conscious. And actually, Nick Herbert did write a good book about this. I forget. He wrote a couple of books, but this book about mind links. I forget what it's called, The Mind, where Nick envisages all these kinds of machines that the CIA really and the intelligence agencies in general, and not just the CIA, it's the Russians, it's the Israelis. I can tell you a lot about that. That they want to know how to control consciousness. Obviously for non-lethal weapons, we have Colonel John Alexander, right, with his non-lethal weapons. Why use a neutron bomb? Why use napalm? Why use any of these weapons that destroy property if we can just win a war by controlling the enemy's mind? Okay. Now, of course, we know I can get a whole thing of sideways with the CIA involved with that, and William Colby, the DCI, and what the Russians were doing, and Uri Geller and the Mossad. That's a whole other aspect of what we're involved in here. Okay, and or the high strangeness factor. So in any case, so that was CIA and Defense Department. We were actually getting money from, not directly from the CIA. George's group, INS group, was a defense contractor, and we were getting money from the Army Tank Command and from the United States Air Force, and also, from Rockefeller via Jean Lanier and her husband, Sidney Lanier. So in any case, they want to know how consciousness works. Then what's the second thing? That's what's important now, today, right? With UAP. How do flying saucers fly? How do flying saucers fly? And those are the two things they want to know. And basically, that's what I've been working on for 50 years. And actually, even before 70 years, I go back because I think I met Phil Corso and all these Army guys at the Quartermaster Corps. They were talking flying saucers to me back then in 1949. That's 2 years after Roswell, maybe 3 years after Roswell. Okay. Now, there's also talk that one of the reasons the CIA was created in 1947 is because of Kenneth Arnold and the flying saucer flap. And I also happen to know from very direct, reliable source that one of the creators of the Central Intelligence Agency was a man named James Jesus Angleton. Now, Angleton was very, very concerned about the flying saucer issue, took it very seriously. And James Angleton, he collected a huge amount of intelligence on flying saucer events. I know this from a member of the family, okay, a member of the Angleton family. And I know a lot about that. So, but okay, so there we are. But the two problems are related: consciousness, flying saucers are UAPs. Now okay. Let's go on to the next slide. We come back. You can ask questions about all this later. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. This is important. Now, this is very important. This is a picture, it's a space-time diagram, and what I'm showing are pictures of the local light cones, okay? Now, there's a thing, now the papers, I think I've discovered a serious mistake in almost every warp drive theoretical paper that's been published from Alcubierre onward. Even the guys that they've gotten confused about something. They're claiming, and this is a correspondent, Eric Davis, if you're listening, pay some attention to this. They're claiming there's a problem. They're claiming if you have a warp drive, if it goes superluminal, there's going to be a problem because they're claiming there's going to be a problem of local event horizons. What's going to happen, I think there's going to be, I forget if it's a black hole horizon in the front of you and a white hole in the rear of you. But in any case, there's going to be a horizon problem so that if you're in warp drive and if it's faster than light warp drive, you cannot navigate the ship because you won't be able to see the outside. You won't be able to see the outside because of what's called a horizon problem. And here's an example of a horizon. Look at that dotted orange line says apparent horizon for Bob. Okay, Bob is the blue light cones. So what happens is see the light will never reach Bob. So what's happening from Bob's point of view, if he's trying to look at Alice, at a certain point, Alice is going to disappear from view because no light signals from Alice can ever reach Bob because light signals from Alice, or any signal from Alice would have to be outside of Alice's local light cone. And the idea is if you don't have fast light signals, you're gonna, that's called a horizon. But see, internally, there's no problem. Internally, there's no problem for Alice, who's in the ship. She could be going fast in light, and she could see ahead of her. There's no horizon for Alice. The horizon is only for Bob. So people have gotten very confused. What they've done is to confuse what the distant observer is seeing with what the local observer actually sees. So there's no horizon. I claim there's no horizon problem for local observers. There's only what appears to be horizon because they're using the wrong equations. They're using what the equations for what Bob sees, who's far away from Alice. And now you could also say, well, what about the problem of colliding with cosmic dust and objects and stuff? That's not going to be a problem either, unless that's not going to be a problem for particles that are surrounding the ship that are also on geodesic motions, because they're also going to be manipulated by the local gravitational field that Alice is controlling within her ship. So I'm saying that the situation for fast and light warp drive, say relative to the Earth, say if we want to get to an exoplanet, fast and light, the situation is not as bad as everybody thinks. Which, of course, if what I could be wrong, but if what I'm saying is correct, that also means it's a lot easier for hostile aliens, ETs, using warp drive to get to us if they want to destroy us, the military threat. Now, there's one thing that Christopher Mellon, who's Christopher Mellon? He's one of the guys with Louis Elizondo and Hal Puthoff and that clown Tom DeLonge they left. Christopher Mellon, he's a blue blood. Yeah, he's the grandson of Andrew Mellon, who was Secretary of the Treasury and one of the top, most powerful people of his time. Well, not only wealthy, but also politically powerful. And Christopher Mellon at one point during the Clinton administration, and I think the early part of the W's administration, was in the Defense Department, and for some time he was a protege of William Cohen, who was Secretary of Defense, and at one point he was like an assistant Secretary of Defense for intelligence. Even he's not a scientist. He went to Colby College, in history of political science, something. He has like an international finance degree or something from Yale. Of course, they all go to Yale, right? Skull and Bones and all that. And Christopher does say, and I agree with Christopher Mellon on this point. Christopher does say that he thinks these UAPs are a military threat. And Louis Elizondo says that too. Louis Elizondo is kind of he's an Army, was an Army Ranger or something, Army intelligence, sort of like George Koopman. And Elizondo thinks that, they're a threat too. And of course, we have this guy, Frank Milburn, who I know, who I work with. Frank is a retired British Army. I think he was a commando of some kind, Red Berets or something. And he also writes papers for the Mossad think tank, the Begin Sadat Institute at Bar-Ilan University. He's written two white papers for them, in which my work is mentioned. Louis Elizondo's in it, Chris Mellon, Colonel John Alexander, all this stuff. So I know and of course I know Uri Geller very well. Uri Geller is tied in with Benjamin Netanyahu. And Geller himself was basically a Mossad agent. It's now public knowledge. It's in his books. And of course, we know, the Israelis are pretty smart people, and we know that they're very interested in the military threat posed by what the US Navy is reporting in the Nimitz Institute incidents and the others. There have been several others now. Is it the Roosevelt and others? There's a whole bunch of stuff. And also I know the Russians, because I've been interviewed by the Russians. Vladimir Putin's agents came and videoed me about a lot of this stuff during the Obama administration. This was years before, I guess around 2014. So I happen to know that the Russian military intelligence, there's Russians in touch with me, that so this is international. They're all interested in it. And apparently also the Russian Navy has had encounters with these low energy warp drive vehicles, the same as the US Navy, and apparently the Chinese may have. So this is happening all over the place. So one thing I want to be very clear about, this is not a theoretical issue I'm talking about. We actually have facts. It's like, okay, when Einstein was testing his general theory of relativity, he predicted the bending of light by the sun, okay? For me, what I'm saying with low power, all these reports by the Navy, now made official by the Pentagon since October 2017, these are like the gravitational bending of light. These are facts. I'm taking these to be facts. I'm explaining these facts. Well, let's put it this way. Maybe it's a big, massive disinformation. In fact, I think it's funny because Chris Mellon's cousin is John Warner IV, who's the son of the late Senator Warner, who was Secretary of the Navy. And they're like third cousins. They even went to summer camp together, and they're on opposite sides of this thing. Okay, I think John seems to think that this whole thing is some kind of cover-up. Maybe John Warner, you can correct me if I misunderstand your position. But in any case, I know you and your cousin, there's a family feud about this issue. So let's put it this way. Suppose this was a massive disinformation thing by the Pentagon and by the global, by the defense, by the military industrial complex. They want to get more money. So suppose they're going to fake an extraterrestrial invasion. Okay, so someone's going to fake it. All right, but even so, my physics still works. Even if this thing is fake, the physics I'm talking about is going to work. And the technology that we're seeing in these observations is explained by what I'm talking about. So whether those Tic Tac, this is from Mike Turbiner, whether those Tic Tac videos are real or fake, I don't care whether they're fake or not, because maybe the joke's on them. Suppose they are fake, Mike, Mr. Turba, who's Air Force intelligence or retired Air Force intelligence. Suppose they're fake. Well, guess what? The joke's going to be on you because we could build these things anyway. But suppose they're real. If they're real, then it's even worse because then we really have to worry about who's in control of these things, because with these kinds of weapons, these are weapons. They're definitely weapons. With this kind of technology, we don't have a chance. It's like Independence Day. It's like War of the Worlds, unless there's some virus wipes them out. Okay, so I want to summarize here saying that, yeah, this is a military threat, guys. And that's why I'm calling this the second intelligence failure of 2021. Back to 20 years ago, intelligence failure. They didn't get, Clinton could have gotten Osama bin Laden. There was all kinds of screw ups there. The FBI wasn't talking to the CIA. We have similar stupidity happening today. The right people are not talking to me about what this technology really means, what the military threat really means. The Russians take me very seriously. The Russians know what I'm talking about. But the Americans, we have, there's political issues going on here. There's stonewalling. The people in the Pentagon should be talking to me. Randolph Stone, I'm talking to you. You're in the Inspector General's office. You're not doing your job. You should give me a phone call and we should discuss this thing because it's your job to figure out what's going on. And maybe I misunderstood what your job is. Oh, these guys, apparently the guys who wrote the UAP Pentagon report, a bunch of young guys, young schmucks, they don't know anything. Maybe they're 20 years old, they're young lieutenants or something. They're not physicists, they don't know what's going on. That's why the report was so stupid. It was a nothing burger. All right, okay, all right, enough of that. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, oh yeah, okay. Now the big thing here is you hear Hal Puthoff, he mentioned he pays lip service to metamaterials, and so does Louis Elizondo. You keep hearing that it's a buzzword. Metamaterials is a buzzword. Do they ever explain how metamaterials fit into the phenomenon? Do they explain why metamaterials? They don't say anything. They just say, oh, metamaterials, we found this debris. We think it's a metamaterial, but it's slag. It's been melted. It's heated. Linda Moulton somehow somebody gave it to, was it George Knapp or to Linda Moulton Howe? And it's been around for like 20 years. And the one interesting thing that Eric Davis does say somewhere, as I recall, is that the scale of the metamaterials goes down to like an angstrom, 10 to minus 8 centimeters. Lattices with a lattice spacing like 10 to minus 8 centimeters. That's like a tenth of a nanometer. And that's beyond any technology. Now, this was stuff that was found 20, 30 years ago, right? So we didn't have the technology to build that then. So is it extraterrestrial? Well, it may be coming from our future. See, it could be time travel. I think it's time travel. I've reason, but let's, so the point is that although Tucker Carlson has Nick Pope, who doesn't know anything either. He's a nice guy. He's not a scientist. The Ministry of Defense had him, investigating UFOs, and it's good. It's all good that they did that. But none of them have a clue about how the physics works. And they just say, Louis Elizondo says, the physics is, we don't understand it. Louis Elizondo doesn't understand it. Even Hal Puthoff may not understand it. I tried to explain some of it. I was actually with Hal Puthoff and Kit Green in October, late October, like October 26, 27, 28 in London. And I was with them at this meeting with David Bohm, Centennial. And we were in the hotel room. Remember, every calls are coming in from Washington, D.C., from the Pentagon, maybe of Leslie Keane, people like that. And either Kit Green or Hal Puthoff would have to go out of the room and talk, because they didn't want me to hear what was going on. They were setting up the December release from the New York Times of, it was pretty funny. I was actually there in the room when all this was going on. So that's a synchronicity. Why did that happen? Well, I can tell you all kinds of weird synchronicities like that. And and I can tell you why I think it is happening. But let's go on to, so the metamaterials. I'm the only guy, me with Keith Wanser, I'm the only guy who has an explanation based on conventional physics that explains why metamaterials are important for warp drive. And one thing, when I say based on conventional physics, Nick, I'm talking to you. Yeah, of course, I've gone a little bit beyond conventional physics, but only what John Archibald Wheeler calls radical conservative extension of known physics. Very minimal change in what is battle tested, what we know, as opposed to going into like M theory of Ed Witten. You know, it's all mathematics. I don't see any physics there, except maybe they what seems to have some physics is the Lenny Suskind's hologram picture is being now applied in condensed matter physics, quantum Hall effect, these edge states, bulk states. That looks like that's like the hologram theory of Susskind does seem to have some practical application. It's interesting because he's there with the guy Laughlin, who also did quantized Hall effect. So there is, you know, and graphene, all that kind of stuff. So there is some application of the holograph ideas, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on in string theory that, you know, that's just nonsense. I mean, it doesn't, I mean, beautiful mathematics, impressive mathematics. As I say, mathematics, the opiate of the theoretical physicists. Let's go on to the next thing. Next slide, please. Thanks. Okay, so here is more. All right. Well, I'll get back to this. Let me have a little water. The equation here, the cosine, Einstein's equation, but has this cosine thing. The cosine comes because the source of the induced gravity warp field is going to be an electromagnetic pump field. Electromagnetic field in dielectrics, and in fact, metamaterial dielectrics. The permittivity, the permeability, the magneto, there's all kinds of stuff in the susceptibility, different kinds of susceptibility when the metamaterial is anisotropic and inhomogeneous and dynamic, what's called space-time metamaterials. You have the constitutive parameters of the metamaterial have imaginary parts. They're complex fields. And they have imaginary parts, and that's because of dissipation. It's heat, like Joule, like the resistance in a LCR circuit. When you actually do the mathematics, it appears like an imaginary part in the basic equations of motion when you do a Fourier transform. In any case, so we have this imaginary part, and that leads to this cosine function. But this is the key. This is beautiful. That nobody's noticed it before. I haven't seen this in any textbook at all, because you know why? Let me explain something. When you read any book on general relativity, almost, and especially the papers, the theoretical physicists who do general relativity, except for people like Kip Thorne. Kip Thorne's like an engineer, and yeah, because Wheeler was an engineer. Except for those guys, they want to be like pure mathematicians. They want to be elegant. So what do? I set capital G equal 1. I set C equal 1. And it's not even there. Goes away. It goes away. I have GAB. It's TAB. So of course they never think of what the hell. They never really think of what's going on inside a material. They don't know solid state physics. I'm not a good solid state physicist either, I must admit. But Keith Wanser is a very good solid state physicist. He knows what's going on inside. Okay, but I know it's important to know what's going on inside materials. And then there's this bogus argument. They say, oh, well, it's got to be the speed of light in vacuum in the coupling because that's an invariant. Well, it turns out we can make an invariant for the what under certain specialized conditions becomes like the speed of light inside material. It's invariant. In terms of Einstein's gravity field equations, everything's invariant. Everything is mathematically kosher, okay? So no, but look, this cosine thing, it's a phase shift. It's a phase shift. What happens is you have, say, electromagnetic fields coming in, and they induce a gravity field, and there's a relative time delay, a phase shift between the input electromagnetic field and the output gravitational field that it's generating. And if that phase shift is right, there's a sign change, and that's anti-gravity. We got anti-gravity, guys. It's there. It's in materials. You don't see it. You don't see it. Normally in most materials, you won't see it because most materials, you know, the dissipation is not that important. And any case, what I'm saying is, prediction now, it's extremely easy to make anti-gravity with hardly any energy at all. You just got to tweak, you just got to tune how much dissipation there is relative to how much non-dissipation rates, or in terms of microscopic physics, how much inelastic photon, electron, positive, how much photon scattering off charges, whether negative or positive charge in the material, how much inelastic scattering, which is generating heat, versus elastic forward scattering, which is kind of reactive, which is reversible. If you change that ratio, and if you change enough, the gravity field you induce is going to go from attractive to repulsive. And of course, that's great because that's what you need for warp drive. That's what we see these Tic Tacs actually doing. Now, if you have anti-gravity, you have what's called the blue shift. Because what's happened with anti-gravity, when it actually expands space, it's actually causing, it's opposite to what you normally think in terms of motional Doppler effect. So you can have a blue shift. Now, let me get back. There's this guy named, you all heard of Bob Bigelow, right? Bob Bigelow and Jacques Vallée and Kit Green and John Alexander and George Knapp, the Las Vegas gang, and they're all tied in with Senator Harry Reid, right? Senator Harry Reid was Speaker of the House at one point. And at one point, Bob Bigelow, who is a Mormon, by the way, no, he's Mormon. That's important because the Mormons are, the Mormon religion is a flying saucer cult, basically, ETs and all that stuff. And, and Bigelow was really into flying saucers. And also he had this thing called the Skinwalker Ranch up in Utah, where all these, there's a paper, in fact, the High Strangers paper by Jacques Vallée and Eric Davis, they talk about what appears to be a wormhole, a little Stargate, a floating orb wormhole, which a Bigfoot, this sounds pretty crazy, but a Bigfoot gorilla type creature comes out of the damn thing, comes out of I came out of that wormhole right behind me, but this but my cousin Bigfoot, he came out of a real one that was hovering above the Skinwalker Ranch, allegedly. So this story goes back like 20 years or something like that, or 15, 20 years. Okay, so what happens is that Bob Bigelow sells his ranch to another Mormon, another very rich Mormon. Okay, Mormons are rich, they're smart. And there's a guy named Brandon Fugel. And he has, on History Channel now, he has his Skinwalker Ranch series. And they're talking also, they claim 1,000 feet above them, there's this sphere, it looks like there's this thing. They think Brandon Fugel has this guy, Travis Taylor, who's kind of right out of Central Casting. He's like a movie star, handsome kind of looks, and he's a astrophysicist. And Travis is his science guy, right? And they claim, no, but here's the thing now. They're getting radiation sickness, man. They're claiming that, a couple of guys that got sick, they think there's ionizing radiation. Well, what happens is, if you stand beneath a floating flying saucer that's in warp drive, you're going to get sick. You're going to get radiation sickness. Why is that? Because you have the anti-gravity blue shift is ionizing, the molecules and the atoms that are in the air or anything around. It's increasing its energy. It's a blue shift. It means that, the energy is increasing. And you're going to get plasma. Yeah, there's just plasma. You're going to see all that stuff that they see. So that the fact that they've been getting sick standing underneath this thing is totally explained as a hovering orb. Okay, by the way, a Tic Tac can be a Stargate too. The two things, it turns out that the wormhole, like traveling through a wormhole, Stargates we get to Mars in a split second by just going through the Stargate. That's all. It's the same equation. This equation. It's Einstein's equation with different boundary conditions. Different applications of the same equation. So you can have your Tic Tacs, your flying saucers. They can operate as warp drive vehicles, even going. They can go 100 miles an hour. It doesn't matter how fast they go. They can do everything the Navy reports seeing them do. And then they can also switch into Stargate mode. We can write mathematical solutions. In fact, what's his name? Matt Visser. Matt Visser is a very good relativist. I think he's still in Australia or New Zealand. He's published a bunch of papers on this. On on traversable wormhole solutions and how it connects with the warp drive solution. So that's all standard general relativity, and you just have to put the strong coupling that Keith Wanser and I have used the metamaterial trick to amplify the coupling between the applied stress energy source tensor, electromagnetic field source tensor, and the gravity field it induces. And we understand it. I mean, when I say we understand it conceptually, qualitatively. It's not a mystery. We understand that what's basically is going on here. When I say, okay, let me make an analogy with World War II, Manhattan Project. Okay, what happened? 1930s in Germany, Nazi Germany, Jewish woman physicist, Lisa Meitner, I think she was Jewish. She sees nuclear fission, right, in the lab. And I actually spoke with John Wheeler about this. He was telling me about some of this stuff. And John Wheeler was visiting Niels Bohr, in Copenhagen, the Bohr Institute. And, and Bohr and Wheeler figured out a very simple kind of model, liquid drop model, I think it was, for how the nuclear fission might work that they're seeing. And so the basic idea, they understood the basic idea of nuclear fission. Right away, everybody saw you could build a bomb, right? That was any physicist, nuclear physicist, Hans Bethe, all these guys, they were to say you could build a bomb. That's like what I'm saying. We could build a warp drive. We know the basic equations. There's liquid drop model for nuclear fission, stuff like that. But of course, to actually do it, that's a big deal to actually do it. Although everybody knew, Hitler knew, Heisenberg was, the Nazis knew, and the race was on to actually build the bomb. And it took a Manhattan Project. We actually did it with 3 or 4 years, right? That was pretty amazing. A couple of $1 billion. Richard Feynman and these guys, and Bethe, who was my professor at Cornell, and Phil Morrison and Wilson, all these guys under Oppenheimer. And in 3 or 4 years, they actually did it. They actually built it. And Heisenberg, I don't know, Heisenberg maybe sabotaged, who knows, but the Nazis didn't get it. And they built the bomb. So in the same way now, I'm saying we understand the basic equation, we understand the basic phenomenon in terms of theoretically how it works. But to make a metamaterial that's going to do it, that's a big job. See, that's engineering. It's called engineering physics. The theoretical physics of the phenomenon is very simple in principle. The engineering physics, of course, it's a major job. And now, but again, I want to emphasize the cosine factor. The cosine factor shows us how to switch from attractive gravity to repulsive anti-gravity. And that's the key component for warp drive, for practical warp drive, is what's called dissipative phase modulation, or phase control of the phase between the input electromagnetic field and the output gravitational field. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay, well, that's just that's too. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, Blake, before you do it, this just shows anybody who says, any of these assholes, pardon my French, pardon my Brooklyn language, from Brooklyn, Flatbush. Anybody who says that there's an invariance problem with a coupling doesn't know what he's talking about. Just plain incompetent, just stupid, okay? Everything is mathematically kosher. Einstein's field equation is a tensor field equation. The gravity field is a second-rank symmetric tensor on the left-hand side. The right-hand side is a second-rank symmetric stress-energy tensor. And the coupling between the electromagnetic source tensor and the gravity field output tensor, that coupling has to be an invariant. Well, but it doesn't have to be a constant. See, when Einstein got his coupling, how did he do it? He didn't have any fundamental physics there. Einstein did it by what's called the correspondence argument. He forced his theory, his equations, to be consistent with Isaac Newton's earlier gravity field equations, which is called the Poisson equation. And in order to do that, and he needed a speed, and he put in the speed of light in vacuum. And by the way, a lot of the calculations of general relativity are done in vacuum. So actually the coupling doesn't come in at all. There is no coupling. Coupling only comes in when you're inside matter. There are a few, in fact, what's called the Schwarzschild solution, the Kerr solution, the Rice and Nordstrom solution for gravity fields. The gravity fields in vacuum outside the charge spinning sources. They don't often go into what's happening inside. They don't deal with it. They don't have to deal with it. Okay. So this is uncharted territory. There hasn't been a lot of work. And I was even talking with Keith Wanser the other day, trying to find literature in stellar structure, neutron star structure, stuff like that. Do they have to use general relativity for the equations of state for what's happening inside the sun or inside, say, neutron stars, which are very dense? And apparently, I'm looking through Chandra Sekhar, Virginia Trimble, textbooks, all the books, none of them really use general relativity inside materials. Nobody's done it. So it's unknown territory. Now, there's the only person where I could find is, hang on, this book. I don't know if you can see it. This is Relativity, Thermodynamics, Cosmology, Richard C. Tolman, Caltech. He was professor of physical chemistry and mathematical physics at California Institute of Technology. This is the Oxford University Press. And when was it? 1934. 1934, guys. And he does have some stuff about what's happening inside. Okay, so if anybody finds, if Art Wagner, you're good at this, try to find some papers, current papers on the equations of state in extreme matter with general relativity corrections. So the point is, all these guys who are like criticizing me without knowing what the hell they're talking about, they don't even know the literature. They don't know there's no evidence that has to be the speed of light inside. There's no evidence that if you're talking about what's happening in the physics of matter inside materials, especially these metamaterials, which have these extraordinary electromagnetic resonance properties, that there's no evidence in any experiment that the coupling inside the material is the speed of light in vacuum. There's no evidence for that. No empirical. There's no reason for. But they quote it like verse. It's like a biblical scholar saying, that God created the earth in 7 days. And it's like that literal. You can't. And if you question it, you're a heretic. Burn them at the stake. I mean, it's that kind of bullshit from these guys. What's wrong with these assholes, Mr. Knuth and all you guys? All right. You're being stupid. So pardon me, but that's my honest opinion. All right. So there's this stuff. We'll get back to this. Let's go on to the next slide. Okay. Well, that's okay. Again, this is just the gravity redshift. This is looking at this. This is the ship is moving to your right on your screen. It's moving to the right. The gravity redshift is at the nose, and the gravity blue shift is at the tail. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, just driving the point home once more that when you have positive curvature, space contraction, time expansion, gravitational redshift, anti-gravity, negative curvature, space expansion, time contraction, gravity blue shift. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, that just repeats. All right, you know what now? I think I've been talking long enough. I don't know, is anybody still there? Am I talking to myself? Is anybody out there? At this point, Tim, let's switch. Let me get to my iPad. Let's see if we can do that. And let's start taking some questions. We could always go back to the slides if we have to. Let's start taking some. Now, let me see. Okay. Are you there, Tim? What's happened? Wait, I mute. I can't hear you. Can you hear me? Wait a minute. I can't hear you. You're recording. I don't want to mute. Tim, if you're talking.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Okay, I'm sorry. That's my fault. Yes. Thank you, Remy. I was on mute. What I want to do is have this on. Everybody, we've got it on gallery view. Everyone, please give Jack an enormous hand for the beginning part of that presentation.
All right, that's all right. I don't need a hand, but I am going to need my iPad.
Well, we have to clap, and that was you drilled through a ton of material as well. So
yeah, and I didn't only touch the surface.